Hello and welcome to Stop the Press on March the 10th, 2025, the day when a tremendous amount of stuff is going on in terms of geopolitics, but we're going to talk about sport, which does feel like much safer ground. There is a story today about sport, and it's the new DG of the BBC saying that Match of the Day should be more about analysis and not about the actual highlights of the games, which personally I don't believe, but there you go. So anyway, yes,
less
before
football,
we start,
more analysis.
Yes, that's what he's saying, and frankly, I watch it for the football. I quite often fast forward through the analysis, especially last night when it was Joe Hart and Micah Richards, who don't have much to add to it as far as I'm concerned.
I kind of disagree here, by the way. But are we moving straight into the podcast here? Are we going to just say hello to each other, or
we might as well say hello to each other? Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody. I'm not, just to give everyone some context, I am not on great form at the moment. I had either a bad cold or COVID over the weekend, and I'm still recovering, and I am not 100 miles an hour in my head. So apologies for that. I'm Rob Chadwick, and hello to everybody.
Hello, everyone. I'm Nick Copson.
And I am Bill Martin. Hello.
Good. Okay, excellent. And what have we been up to over the last week? I know I've been basically lying in bed being ill.
You've been poorly.
Yes.
Nothing of any kind of reason to write home about. I wish today I was at Cheltenham on the Black Pop, I reckon, but I'm here with you guys, and this is probably a close second.
I've been to Spain.
Have you? Oh,
Yeah.
great. What happened in Spain?
Alicante.
This is your second holiday of the year already?
Yes, second of many.
I'm doing something wrong in life, aren't I?
Yeah. I love Alicante, by the way. I've been to Alicante. I really liked it. It's really nice.
Very easy to get to.
Yeah.
Celebrated Mrs. Martin's birthday. Came back.
Very nice, yeah.
On weekend?
3 nights.
Yes.
Great. Yeah, I went to a really great steak restaurant in there. But there you go. Anyway, onwards. So, yes, we're going to talk about journalism today, and we're going to talk about our favourite sports journalism. And we were trying to decide where we would start. And I think let's start with Nick, because you've brought us 3 sports journalists that you specifically like, haven't you?
Yeah, well, I my sort of contribution to this podcast is around the the journalists that I like to read from, I like to hear from, which is actually the way these days, which you often hear more from them than actually what you read. They're all from the world of football, which isn't necessarily on purpose, but it is probably my number one sport, and it is obviously the number one sport largely across the world anyway, in terms of coverage and viewership. So my 3 are Henry Winter at the actually he's formerly at the Times and Sunday Times. He actually left last year. Jason Burt at the Telegraph, who's the chief football correspondent, and Guillaume Balaguer, who's like appears to be the most connected man in world football, Spanish journalist who and does a lot obviously with English media as well, and many media around the world actually. And I like them, and fundamentally I like these guys. I mean, obviously they're very well spoken, erudite. I'm no doubt terrific writers and journalists in their own right, but fundamentally I like them because I like what their opinions are. I agree with their opinions. When they talk about the world of sport, specifically football, I find myself agreeing with them. There are many that I don't agree with.
How do you consume them? Do you read them or
read them? And obviously in their respective publications and where they appear. But actually, people like Henry Winter and Jason Burr, I've consumed more of them on things like the Sunday Supplement used to be on Talk Sport.
Used to be on Sky
Sport, yeah.
Well.
The Press Pass on Talk Sport with which actually Henry does with Sean Custis, and I like their opinions. I mean, there are many journalists, sports journalists, football journalists that I don't like, and I don't agree with for the almost flip side of that, really, such as Oliver Holt and Jeff Powell at the Daily Mail. I don't disrespect them as journalists at all, but in terms of how they view the world of sport, I find myself in contrast with them.
And what is it about Henry Winter's viewpoint that you identify with particularly?
When you watch sport, you see sport, you see the world of football, you see what happens, and you form your own opinions. Of course you are. You're influenced by other people's opinions as well, and what people say, be it people you know, and journalists and the media and press and so on. But generally, there should be, something that resonates with you. Now, what Henry says, and specifically, completely resonates with me, and I've no doubt my opinions are formed by listening to people like him as well. But whatever's in my head, I can hear Henry Winter talking, and I just find myself nodding, smiling even sometimes. He's a very forthright character, Henry Winter. I've never had the pleasure of meeting him, but I'm sure I would. And I have read a couple of interviews with him, and what struck me is that he says, and I find this in the world of communication in general, is that to learn about anything, he says, you have to listen. He says, when I talk to anyone, he says, I don't try and project my opinions and views on things. That's what I do in my column. He says, but I fundamentally just listen. It'd be a bloke in the pub, or a footballer, or a manager, or my boss, or whatever. I listen. And he says, that's how I'll educate myself. That resonates with me as a way of engaging with the world, I suppose.
Is it their opinion that appeals to you, or is it their journalistic style? Or
I'd say probably their opinions, right? When I look at sport and I watch sport, I'm seeking. This is why you buy into, you're willing to pay money, essentially, for media, be it newspapers or magazines or podcasts, whatever. I'm buying into that to be informed and educated, sometimes entertained. And with journalists like Henry Winter and Jason Burt, I'm getting all three of those.
Yeah.
So those are the reasons. Those are the kind of gentlemen. And Guillaume Balaguer, what can I say? He just seems to be connected with everyone, and I can only assume that is because he's a very, very nice guy, fundamentally trustworthy, knows the world of football inside out. And sports people, professional sports people, are willing to give him their time, and for that reason, he's very valuable, I think. So,
yeah, I agree with that. Sort of fundamentally, when you are reading stuff, you are looking for people who can kind of, reflect your viewpoint, not necessarily kind of agree with it entirely, but at least reflect it or make you think a little bit. So. Someone like Martin Samuel in the Sunday Times is really good at that as well.
Yeah,
the stuff he's written about financial fair play and stuff, and the government regulator for football, for instance, is really interesting. And you do kind of think, yeah, well, you're absolutely right. Of course, there shouldn't be a government regulator for football. Football's a massively successful industry, and government messes up everything it touches. Of course, there shouldn't be a regulator for it, that sort of thing. So, yeah, he's great as well.
He would be an honourable mention for me as well, Martin Samuel. I mean, to that point, I mean, Jason Burt at the Telegraph, he was a let's say a pure play journalist before he was a sports journalist. And he at some point he obviously realised that football was his first love, and that's what he wanted to write about. And he moved into sports journalism, but he still carries that kind of broader kind of, let's say, insight into the world as well as sport and
where football fits within it.
Correct, and how football or sport as well affects society, and he often writes about that, and that. I'm not a learned man, but I've got a broader view of the horizon than perhaps some football fans, and I'd want to know about that. I want to know about how society is affected, how our economy is affected by sport, all those sort of things. So
I always say football is one of the most important things in the world, which I know gets people's backs up, but when you've got 4.5 billion people watching football regularly, and most of those watching the Premier League regularly, it is intrinsically important. You can walk into any bar in any place in the world, and if there's a football game on the telly, you can strike up a conversation with people, even if there's a language barrier. That is important.
Yeah.
Really important.
Football's a religion, isn't it?
Yes.
In
the absence of actual religions these days.
A great unifying force. I mean, I think I didn't come with any individual journalists as my top three today, but I'd name check one, which is Michael Atherton.
Yeah.
Writes about cricket in the Times, obviously, and a broadcaster on Sky, I think, still. But I think, again, it's his opinion, but it's also what he shares with me is a deep love and understanding of the game and how important it is.
Yeah.
You know, to an individual like me, how it can make or break my day what happens in a cricket match. It's quite sad, isn't it? But it's true. And for a nation like India, for example, he wrote a piece yesterday about the Champions Trophy finals at the weekend, which India won and that sort of thing. And he captured the sort of significance of this great unifying force that is the Indian cricket team now. Brilliant.
I mean, it is a great unifying force, but then they wouldn't play in Pakistan, which was a real problem as far as I was concerned for the Champions Trophy.
Well, absolutely.
For the credibility of the tournament.
And for the credibility of cricket in general,
Yeah.
In my view. But, you know, it's another subject.
It's another issue, isn't it? Yeah, yeah.
Another issue.
Yeah, I love reading
There's
Michael
no doubt
Atherton
that
as
India
well.
is the Donald Trump of the cricket world at the minute.
True.
Can do what it wants.
Yeah, and kind of force everyone to come into line, basically, can't they? Yeah, which is not good because of the IPL predominantly, which is not great. So what else did you bring in then, Bill?
Well, I brought three things which I guess dominate my life, to be honest, in many respects. The first one is interesting because I'm not a football fan, as you both know, but my first one is 606. It's a radio programme on Saturday evenings, which you
love
know.
it.
I was listening to it Saturday afternoon.
Chris
Saturday
and Robbie.
evening. Yeah.
I mean, I absolutely love that. And I think it's because, again, it captures how important football is to people. Mm-hmm. And you've got people from ringing in all over the country, you know, whether they've been watching Macclesfield or Reading or Man United. You get people's bonkers, I mean, patently bonkers opinions a lot of the time.
Yeah. That's part of the fun, isn't
Frustratingly
it?
bonkers.
quite often ridiculed by Chris Sutton or Robbie Savage, who I think are one of the great dual presenting teams. They clearly love each other, but they wind each other up relentlessly.
Yeah.
I just think it's great. And even if I don't know the scores of the matches, I won't follow football in the afternoon, that sort of thing. But if I'm at home and I'm cooking, 606, happy days.
It's really good. Yeah, I was listening on the way home on Saturday night, and it was. I mean, it was its usual self. It was Robbie ripping into Chris Sutton as much as he possibly could, and Chris Sutton being arrogant and funny about it. Basically, it's a great comedy duo, isn't it?
I know. I listen to it, but I often have to like switch over, and often when I'm driving, I listen to it, and just because of the incoherent views of some of the people ringing in, I go, I can't listen to this.
But that reflects, doesn't it? It really
reflect.
reflects.
It does,
the sort of bonkers nature of football and football fans. and I love some of the Man City fans who are now ringing in. The sack the manager calls come after almost 2 or 3 games. Two losses, and everyone wants the manager sacked. I mean, it's
mad, isn't it? It's absolutely mad. I do think he's probably going to go, but I don't think he'll ever be sacked. He's just too good, isn't he?
No, they couldn't sack him.
No.
He's unsackable in that regard, isn't he?
Yeah.
He'd have to walk.
So, Robbie Savage and Chris Sutton and Michael Atherton, 3 people who played the sport that they are now journalists within. What do you think makes a good ex-sports person become a journalist? Because plenty try and just aren't really there. I think of someone like Wayne Rooney, who as a summariser I find really difficult because he just doesn't feel like he's enthusiastic about the game and stuff. What do you think makes someone able to make that step? And is there examples from your time in the business, guys, where you've kind of taken an ex-Argyle player or something and said, can you write for us or something?
That's a really good question. I mean, on the sort of national stage, I think people... It's a lot of it's down to character, isn't it? And again, that sort of deep love and understanding of the game and of the people who watch it. I think that's, when people have that, they've got a chance of entering into them immediately. You've got to feel sorry for someone like Wayne Rooney because he, just the way he speaks, even the way he looks. He's not built for TV, is he?
He could shave.
Yeah.
I don't feel that sorry for him. He could shave.
He could
and open his mouth while he speaks.
Yeah, he could.
He got compared recently to Henry VIII. I heard.
But there are other people, aren't there, who take more naturally to presenting on TV. So I think all the skills that TV presenters need in general.
Yeah.
Or radio broadcasters need, but essentially you need that. You need that sort of deep love and understanding of the game, don't you? And then you can build the sort of journalistic integrity onto that. So Michael Atherton was clearly a cricketer before he became a journalist, but he was an educated man, wasn't he? Who took all that sort of knowledge and he's learned his journalism on the hoof.
Gary Lineker is a good example of that. In all fairness, he was. I mean, obviously he's been a sports journalist now, hasn't he? Well, if you want to call him a journalist, he's a broadcaster perhaps, but you call him a journalist, I would. 30 years, so he's had a long time at it now. It's definitely a second career, but right from the off, he was almost unflappable, in terms of TV presenting.
Yes, but you see his first. Show reel or the first show he presented and things like that. He's quite awkward. And not the sort of. I mean, he's a brilliant presenter now, isn't he? Brilliant.
But he's become that. And I remember even one of the old commentators, John Motson or something like that, saying, right from the off, you could tell that he had that ability. He needed plenty of coaching and experience, but he had that ability. But Gary Lineker is a fairly. No, perhaps not academically educated, but he's a fairly bright guy, and that helps translate, doesn't it? So
no doubt about that.
And were there any Argyle players or local rugby players or anything that you kind of nurtured into being a journalist to write for the paper?
We had some players who wrote columns. We always used to try and have a column with the manager, if you know what I mean, and some of them were very good at it. Ian Holloway knew how to work with the media when things were going well. You'd fall out with them very quickly when things were going badly. Players' columns were always a bit difficult, if you know what I mean.
Were they a bit ghostwritten?
Very ghostwritten.
Right.
Yeah, a lot of them.
What do you think about, right, I'll write that up for you?
Yeah, a lot of them were interviews that were written into a column.
Right.
Paul Sturrock wrote a couple of columns for the Herald at one point, including one about cooking. I don't know if you remember that.
Did he? I don't remember that. All right, excellent. Yeah, good. And they were good. They were good, and they turned. Yeah. Did you? So I guess what I'm asking is, did it come naturally to them, or was it a question of not necessarily you, but the paper as a whole, kind of sitting with them and saying, "Well, have you thought about structuring like this?" And have you thought? Did they need a bit of guidance before it was going to print, or did they just hand you something which you put straight in the paper?
I think that rarely happens. Even trained journalists don't quite get that privilege, if you know what I mean, although, or never used to. They probably do now. There are always banks of sub-editors or editors or that sort of thing to check and double-check copy. But I think people who took to it naturally, Holloway and Sturrock are good examples, it's more to do with their character, do you know what I mean?
Right.
Sort of larger than lives. Both leaders of men in different ways, and they're confident in themselves and their own opinions, so they're quite happy. They're not worried. They're kind of not worried about what to say.
Yeah,
quite often.
Ian Holloway's clearly not worried.
Can I say that?
He's a fascinating individual, though, Ian Holloway, isn't he?
Mad.
I think he's got madder.
Yeah.
Well, he's played to his character, isn't he, as well? But he's fascinating to listen to.
Yeah, fascinating to listen to, and he was brilliant to work with when he was in Plymouth.
Yeah. So my first one is David Walsh, and predominantly, I like the way he writes anyway. He writes about sport, so he's done some great work around Yulia. Can't remember the name of them, but there was a couple of Russians who exposed the doping that was going on at Sochi and generally within the Russian team. And he's been the one who's championed their cause, and they're now in America kind of hiding from Russia, etc., etc. And he's kind of stuck with them, and he's really kind of held USADA and WADA and RUSADA to account, the anti-doping agencies and stuff, and he doesn't let go, and he really campaigns on that stuff, and he's campaigned for these people and he's campaigned for other things, and of course he was the person who really dug in his heels about Lance Armstrong, and kind of almost from the very first time he rode after his illness, after his cancer, David Walsh kind of just shook his head and said, "This isn't true," and wouldn't accept it until something like 10 years later. It all came out because Floyd Landis said, "Yeah, it's all true," and went to USADA, and it all came out because of that, as it were. But the abuse he got in the meantime, and the times getting taken to court and losing, and the damages they had to pay and stuff, a lesser person would have given up. But that, for me, was true journalism.
100%, and he's probably the best example in the UK of a sports journalist. You know, I mean, he's not reporting matches. I'm sure he's attending them. You know, he is a journalist through and through, and his trade, and all, you know, as you say, has required bravery, patience. You know, incredible amounts of research. He's obviously had the backing of his employers, which is, you know,
really important.
You know, which is really important. Very hard to do that sort of work completely on your own. But also, you know, he understands the value of his backing for those, you know, those two athletes who you said called out in the doping scandal, or, you know, having someone who can publicly say, you know, report their side of the story and be there for them, because it's daunting taking on organisations, the establishment.
Well, Lance Armstrong, who was an immensely influential character, not just in sport and cycling, but, you know, in America, really. He was a poster child for America. With his recovery from cancer and the charity work he was doing, and his putting American cycling on the map. He was so influential. That to go up against that requires balls, money, guts, determination like you wouldn't believe.
Yeah. I mean, Armstrong was in press conferences just calling him out all the time. And all the other journalists were basically saying, well, no, we better play along with it because otherwise we won't get access. Yeah. And they started to ostracise him and stuff as it went along as well. So it just took absolute tenaciousness, didn't it? He's also all over at the moment. He's all over dementia and football and rugby particularly, and things like that. He's a right campaigner. He really is, and I really admire him as a journalist.
As we've covered a few times in our podcast episodes so far, this I think is a prime example of the future of journalism. It's not the future as such; it's been around forever, but that's where the value comes in. It's the type of reporting, sports journalism that you can't get anywhere else unless somebody's funding that, right? You can't. You know what David Walsh did there in the Times as well. You wouldn't be able to get anywhere else in this current climate of media. It requires one person with that tenacity, to go after it. Yeah, and that in the future that will be, well, hang on, who's going to do that if there's nobody funding broadcast media?
Yeah, the platform was important for him as well, wasn't it?
Of course it was.
You know, so his work had a platform.
Yeah. Well, exactly.
Published on those things, so the two can be quite powerful.
The Stepanovs were the name of the Russian
couple.
Yes. Yulia and Alexander, I think, Stepanov. There is a book called The Russia Affair, if anyone's interested in reading it, and it's all about that story and their trying to hold Russia to account for their doping and stuff. And it's incredibly good and inspiring. And you have to worry about them under the current climate. You'd have to worry about their safety, basically. What's your second one then, Bill?
My second one is the Wimbledon Fortnight.
Ah, yes.
What, you like it? This is you liking it?
I love it.
Oh, my God.
I love it. It's an absolute staple of my sporting year, if you know what I mean. And if I could take 2 weeks off and do nothing else and watch it from 10 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night, I would. And I think...
my mum loves it as well.
I'm sure she does. How it's packaged, how it's presented... obviously, it's developed over the years, but essentially, it's the same. As the format's very similar. I think it's brilliantly done. As an absolute.
It's a great product for the country, isn't it?
Great product for the country. A great example of how to cover a tournament. So there you go. And it's got Claire Balding.
Okay.
Another one of the great presenters. You don't agree?
I love this. There's some opinions that our colleague here, Rob, is not willing to offer here, but and I could probably encourage him not to offer.
Oh, it's everything I hate about British sport. It's like people on the sidelines waving Union Jacks endlessly.
Well, Wimbledon. You don't like Wimbledon?
I can't abide Wimbledon.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, I love the tradition of it. I love the fact they make them wear all white. I love that. No
I
other
quite
tournament
like
does
that. It's the audience,
Right.
and I wouldn't call them like a crowd. That I'd call them an audience. They go along for the experience, not the tennis.
Yes.
And it's calling things like Henman Hill and Murray Mound and stuff. It's all so twee. And Claire Balding is the queen of twee. And it's like, I just
But Britain
cannot
is
handle
twee
it.
often, isn't it? In the eyes of the foreigners, Britain is quite twee, I think. Not
If
to
we-
us it isn't. But
Yeah, if we want to continue marketing ourselves as twee, it is absolutely a great thing for the country. 100% agree with you.
But twee or not, it's based around a fantastic game and this great, sort of gladiatorial thing that's going on between two men or two women is extraordinary to watch. Have you ever been?
I've not been. No,
I'd
must
love
admit,
to
I've
go.
not
So
been.
I'd love to go.
If you've ever, tennis on TV is one thing, but when you're up close, the power and the effort and the fitness.
Oh, yeah.
If you Novak Djokovic must be one of the, or was up until about 12 months ago, the most supreme athletes.
Yeah.
On
They
earth.
have to play every other day for most of the year. It's amazing.
And some of these
If
games
you're
are
at the
4
top of
hours
the game.
long, aren't they?
Yeah,
These matches.
it's mad.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, that'll wipe you out. It would wipe
Yeah.
me out for weeks. And they're playing the next day.
Yeah, imagine. It's horrendous, isn't it? It's horrendous. No, I don't doubt the application of the players and stuff. They're amazing, obviously. And I do like that gladiatorial battle. I like it for the same reason as I like a bowler against a batsman at cricket. It is one-on-one gladiatorial sport at its finest.
Yeah.
It's just everything that surrounds it that I don't like much. There you go.
Nicholas?
Well, I
don't care.
I think it's. I'm a very patriotic guy. I admire what Britain does really well. I get very frustrated with the stuff that Britain doesn't do very well, which we won't go into now.
Potholes.
Right? Hey,
Potholes.
yeah. Well,
let's
there's
not go
a
into
prime
it now.
example. Industry, right? But Wimbledon as a product. And I don't know. I haven't got the numbers in front of me what it does for our tourism industry, but I bet it's pretty significant. Wimbledon as a product is absolute spectacle, and I love that. I love the fact that it's steeped in history and tradition. It's the only grass court major in the world, of course, as well, and I love that. And even if the players don't like it, and many of them don't, they prefer hard courts. They still want to come here because it's Wimbledon. I just love that. I love that, and no other country has got that sort of history attached to their sport. There's plenty to do. I don't want to get into that debate now, but I admire Wimbledon. I'd love to be there. I'd love to get up there in Wimbledon in my, blazer and a tie, perhaps.
Would
And
you?
I'd love to do
You
all
don't
that.
have to wear a blazer.
I know you don't have to, but I'd love to try.
Good.
But also, I think the broadcasting package
Yeah, I mean, we are talking journalism. Yeah.
Yes.
is textbook sporting coverage from beginning to end, and the mixture of coverage, analysis, and humour.
Great. Excellent. Well, yeah, I mean, I can see that what they do is done well. It's just not for me, I think. Yeah. So my second one is Soccer Saturday, which I think is also a great British institution. Such a brilliant format. One person sat reading out the scores and 4 people watching games and talking about the goals and stuff within the sport. Who would have ever thought that could be a really popular show? And yet it's 6 hours on a Saturday afternoon and people tune in religiously for it. I've got a mate who would rather watch that than watch the actual games because he just loves the kind of Jeff Stelling and his mates talking about it. Although since Jeff's left, it seems to have lost a little bit of its lustre.
Can it survive?
Well, I'd have thought so. I mean, it is a really good format. It's just really simplistic. It doesn't cost much, does it? Other than paying the actual people who are in front of the cameras. It doesn't cost an enormous amount. It's 6 hours of television, which is incredibly cheap in comparison to what they're paying for to put the actual games on the telly.
Yeah. It was quite groundbreaking at the time, wasn't it, when they brought that format in? I certainly admire that. And it's one of those ones you look at it and go, well, why didn't anyone else think of that?
Yeah.
But they found... I don't know if it was a solution to a problem. The problem was that they couldn't show all of these games on television. They're obviously restricted anyway, aren't they?
Yeah.
So it was a solution to a specific problem. But the format, to your point, is probably better than the match itself.
It comes back to that understanding the game and how important it is to people, isn't it?
Yeah.
So if you've got 6 hours on a Saturday afternoon, you can't show any football, but you know that half the nation, that's all they're thinking about.
Yeah.
So then, let's come up with a format that reflects that, and that's what they did.
It's better than CFAX.
Yeah.
But we loved that back in the day.
Yeah.
Watching CFAX wander around and around and around. I wonder if we've scored in the next 5 minutes.
I've watched whole test matches on CFAX.
Yeah, it's great.
CFAX was
page
341. Correct.
It's amazing, though, isn't it, how old we sound just by talking about that?
I know.
How do we put ourselves through that? We had no choice, of course, but it's incredible.
It's an amazing
no choice.
thing.
No choice.
I don't know when CFAX was turned off.
It was actually very recently. I think it was in the last 5 or 6 years.
Really? It
Yeah,
was still
I'm sure
going?
it was.
Oh my goodness.
There was a news item to say, it's been switched off because clearly no one's.
Because no one's.
10 years too late, of course, it was switched off.
Yeah, well, I guess it was. I guess it was just like, let's replace CFAX with some people actually talking about the game, and it was funny and interesting, and it had ex-pros actually talking about the game, and people like George Best, and you could almost see George Best's battle against addiction week by week on the show, which added something to it, and Merce doing the same kind of battling with his addictions and trying to get through and all of that stuff. It had a real narrative of its own, which I've always felt was a brilliant bit of television, a brilliant bit of journalism.
Plus, what you had was 4 or 5 guys, wasn't it? Really?
Yeah.
And it was that was the situation. All clearly getting on with each other. Great chemistry between them all on live television, and that was something that actually hadn't really happened in the world of traditional broadcasting up to that point. You had live television, but it was always a bit awkward, wasn't it? Live television.
Yeah.
This was clearly
Bit of
live,
banter.
but it was just people just clearly connecting with each other.
Yeah.
Not being too scripted, but obviously towing the line. It was, as a format, it was brilliant.
And the depth of knowledge that Jeff Stelling brought to it, and the depth of research. That is the first goal by such and such for 25 games, and he scored in the 66th minute, and they managed to score 4 out of their 10 goals in the last 60. It's just mad the amount of detail they brought to it.
And he was a Hartlepool fan, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, and how that sort of became almost legend, didn't it?
Yeah.
Whatever the Hartlepool score was.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I also thought that Phil Thompson, was it Phil Thompson?
Yeah,
the guy with
it
the big
was,
nose. Yeah, he was the most football person I think I'd ever seen. Just everything about him was football. The Scouts, he was just.
Yeah.
You could see him in the street saying, "Oh, he's Mr. Football."
Lived and breathed football. Yeah. What else have we got? You've got one more?
Yeah, my third one, and this is very broad indeed, is the whole genre of cricket writing, which I think is a specialist skill. It's a specialist area. I mean, it's only ever be read by people who love cricket. It's only ever written by people who love cricket, I think. And there's all sorts of examples of books, but it's definitely a genre of its own. I've brought with me a prop, as you can both see, which is actually a hardback book.
Oh, well done.
When was the last time you held one of them?
It's been a while.
I've got a paperback.
This is called The Best Love Game, written by a journalist called Geoffrey Morehouse, written in 1978. When he was faced with, this was at the time of the Kerry Packer Revolution, and Packer was attracting players to go to Australia and play in World Series cricket. The end of the world was looming.
I remember.
Do you remember?
Yeah, I remember.
It was looming in the cricket world. This will ruin cricket forever, blah, blah, blah. So Geoffrey Morehouse decided to go and spend a whole summer watching and absorbing and writing about the English cricket season. And there's everything in here from the Varsity match, the first game of the season, which always used to be the MCC against the champion county. He goes to a test match. Very little of this is him writing about, reporting the games, but that he's reporting his trip to that particular game and that sort of thing. There's a scorecard at the end. It's
Wow.
it's a work of absolute genius.
It actually makes me want to read it. Now.
Yeah, same here.
If you love cricket, which he clearly does, and he writes about that. That's what gave me the impetus to. It's my love for the game that made me want to go and do this, because he could almost feel it was under threat, and it's so important to him. He needed to go and absorb himself in the game.
Need someone to do the same again, because it feels to me like the game as we know it is a little bit under threat again now, really. It just feels like the test match stroke 4-day game in most countries is under a lot of threat.
It feels like it's in a similar place, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. It needs someone to sort of really advocate for it, I think, to my way of thinking. The money-making side of things, which is important, has got to such a degree that it's completely and utterly overshadowing what is the traditional game of cricket.
In most sports, actually, now, isn't it? Look at golf.
Yeah.
Golf being torn apart by the live versus the whatever it is, tour battle. And
Yeah. And my other one, very briefly, I was going to mention, we've overrun a little bit, so I won't go into lots of detail, but I was going to mention Martin Kellner's Screen Watch column in The Guardian, which I used to absolutely love. I used to look forward to it every week, and he just had a way of looking at everything which was just hilarious, and he used to just basically poke fun at everybody on the telly and all the journalists and stuff. And I just went through, I'm reading a book which is kind of selected writings from him, which is called Wrestling in Honey, and he's written about F1 and horse racing and cycling and David Duffield and the type of stuff David Duffield used to say, which is hilarious. And I just found a little quote from when he was writing about horse racing, which says, "I was brought up with a variety of unreliable motor vehicles, starting with my dad's second-hand Hillman Husky, which was in the repair shop so often it may have done more miles vertically than horizontally." And I just loved his style of writing. He always had like little gags in there, and very little of it was to do with real sport. But he just was a brilliant writer. Well, I say was. He's still on TalkSport from 12 till 3 in the morning, a couple of times a week, I think. But he's just got a way of looking at sport which is really interesting and fun. And we should never forget, sport is meant to be fun.
There's a lot of lucky people out there who've managed to work out how you can write about sport and in that type of way and earn a living out of it. If you've got the time and the passion and that sort of stuff, it must be an extraordinary life to lead.
So before we quickly do our bad journalistic things, has anyone got anything extra to add to our good journalistic things? No? Go on then, Nick. What's your bad?
My bad journalistic things. Well, I'll just flip on what I said. In terms of the journalist I like, and I think I briefly name dropped him in my opening gambit, which was and the one I hit upon is I can't remember his name now.
He's so bad.
He's so bad, I've forgotten. Jeff Powell,
Jeff Powell, that's the one. Thank you. You rescued me.
I was letting you hang for a little while.
Jeff Powell, who I've read from and read his stories for many years. I grew up as a Daily Mail reader in our household. I'm not now, but I was. And Jeff Powell was the chief sports writer at the Daily Mail for a long time. I've read all his stuff. He's a big boxing writer and commentator, and I love boxing. It's my second sport, probably. And
Bunsey's a great journalist.
Bunsey's good as well. But Jeff Powell, I've seen age. He's obviously he's an elder statesman of the sports journalism world now, I think. But forgive me, right? Forgive me, Jeff, which you are unlikely to be listening to this. Right?
Well, I hope he is.
But it feels like you should be put out to pasture.
Enough.
A lot of what he writes about now and his opinions just feel very, very archaic, right? And I read it now. I think it's such a shame to read that from a guy that I once really respected. But anyway, what about yourself?
Twitter.
Yeah.
Or is it X now?
Whatever.
Yeah, Twitter. Just horrendous. I'm not on it anymore. It started off as a great place to talk about sport with other people all over the world who had the same interest in you and things like that. But it soon takes you down rabbit holes that make you realise that most of the world are idiots.
Liverpool fans.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, Liverpool fans, they've got such a sort of macabre view of everything. It's like if anything goes wrong against Liverpool, they basically head to Twitter,
Sack the manager,
sack the referees. Everybody else is biased against. Oh God, Liverpool fans. My bad one is post-match interviews. And I just cannot see the point, because it's, how do you think that went? Well, it's always the next game around the corner. Whether you win or lose, it's never like, yeah, we did great. We did that and we did that and that and that and that and that. It's just like, what's the point? Don't do that at all. Don't bother with post-match interviews anymore.
Well, I think particularly Football Manager post-match interviews. And I'm astonished when you see a Premiership manager who's just lost a game, and they almost, to me, it always looks like they go and stand, and they sort of stand there with a forlorn look on their face. If the world's, and it's kind of like, I've got to look sad.
Yeah.
These people are getting paid millions. I saw one of the Spurs manager the other day. What's his name?
God,
Ange Postecoglou.
They're the worst.
Like stood
He
there.
never looks you in the eye. Or the interviewer.
Stood there
So
staring at the floor.
Yeah.
As if, I don't know, he just lost a parent or something.
And then the question is something
and I know
along-
it's important. I know, but come on, front up to the media.
Yeah.
Oh.
And then the question is something like, well, that didn't go as well as you'd have hoped. And he takes them to task as if like it's a terrible question to ask. It's like, that's reasonable to ask, Ange. It wasn't as well as you would hope. Honestly, just stop them.
But most of what they, to your point then, most of what they spit out, be it a footballer or a manager, is just cliches. Platitudes. It's just pointless.
Yeah.
It's almost as if they haven't got an opinion, which we well know they have.
Yes.
Right? So what's the point?
Yeah.
Okay, on the subject of opinion, match of the day.
I
Less
think
football, more analysis?
less football, more analysis. And the reason why, and I'll tell you why, is because, and I think we've covered this before in terms of news, you can watch the highlights on almost any channel these days. You can see it immediately, you can watch it live, you can watch it on YouTube. I don't watch BBC One to watch the highlights I've already seen. I watch BBC One Match of the Day to hear Alan Shearer, who I don't love, but still, Alan Shearer and Micah Richards and whoever else is on, talking about the game, because they know a bit more than I do, right? And I want to hear that. So,
Rob?
I want the highlights on there. I don't watch them online. I don't root out them online and stuff. I just wait for them on Match of the Day and just watch the highlights. Quite often zoom through the analysts, depending on who it is. Danny Murphy and Alan Shearer I listen to.
I zoom through them highlights.
I want the actual football. Yeah, it's often the only time I actually see the highlights. So, yeah, I want the actual football. What about yourself, Bill?
Well, as I was saying to Nick before, because I'm not a football fan, I won't seek out the highlights in the afternoon, things like that. So for me, Match of the Day is a format that works, mainly because I know that when it's on, I know they're going to put the good games on first, so I haven't got to watch the whole thing. So if I do want to watch some football, it works for me.
Yeah.
Having said that, I completely understand the argument now in that when media in general is moving on from reporting and recording games, and sort of analysis and depth and what's next and that sort of stuff is, but ultimately it's Match of the Day, so I don't really care. It's football.
Well, that's good. That's a really good note to finish on. I don't really care. It's ideal. 45 minutes of I don't really care. Right, okay. Thank you for listening. We'll be back with an episode on the next episode is there still work in journalism, which should be an interesting one for students and out there. So we'll see how that gets on. Please like and subscribe so that we can get our numbers up. Make sure we aren't talking to just nobody. And we shall see you soon.